Good morning. Some of you speak, huh? Very excited to be here. This is my first time in Saudi Arabia, and it's hot. What I wanted to do is talk about some of the challenges in when we're talking before with some of us, I realized that they're, and reflecting back on the talk, I am a mechanical engineer by training. Before I came to the university, I designed aircraft engines. So when I fly, I say I've learned, when I sit next to somebody in an airplane and they say, "What do you think that noise was?" They really don't want to know. And I've learned to be quiet, not to tell people what I did. But the examples that I'm going to use here are engineering-centric, because that's the world that I live in. If some of you from outside of engineering want me to translate some of that in, or how it applies to other disciplines, please feel free to ask, and I'll do that. Because I think a lot of the challenges that we have are really across disciplines. But I want to talk about the challenges that we have today, a model that we have at Purdue in engineering for equipping global leaders. I want to talk about our program, our EPICS program, which is a design program where we do designs for the community. Talk about design and some of the global competencies, and toss out some curricular models to get you thinking. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. So this idea of global leaderships in this next century, there were two publications that came out a few years ago from the National Academy of Engineering. And they were looking at what the engineer of 2020 needed to be. Now, many of us have pointed out they're going to need to come up with a new book because the graduates of 2020 are coming soon. But they looked at it and they said, what are the larger skills? And I'll show you an example of those skills. Because what people are talking about is engineers and really other professionals in this current century have to do much more than just be able to calculate. Work with people across cultures, across disciplines. The types of problems that we need to solve involve technology, people, environmental concerns. And how do we integrate those? There's a companion book on how do we create educational experiences for those also. The accreditation people. In engineering in the United States, it's ABET, the Washington Accord on how do we accredit or what should programs look like, are moving programs also, again, for those broader sets of skills. And then corporations. In fact, one of the things, well, the main thing that motivated me to move from industry, the corporate world, into the university was I was involved with how do we equip or train graduates that came to our companies. Because what we're having to do is to finish training people. So they come out of the universities and they were good students, but how do we move them into being professionals? And in today's global workplace, corporations, other organizations need our graduates to be able to step in without as much of a learning curve, because they're in a global marketplace. So the global marketplace demands that companies react to competition from all over the world, and we need to provide them graduates that can come in and make an impact. Now, one of the things that happens, and I say engineering, and it's true with everything, is that there's some basic knowledge in any field that is needed, and we still need to teach that. And then people keep inventing new things that we need to cover. If you look at the kind of computer tools, if you look at the advances, so we still one of my prized possessions, my grandfather was a mechanical engineer. And actually, when my grandmother passed away, he died before my grandmother, when we were emptying out her house when it was sold. An aunt of mine was taking this big box to the garbage, and I happened to say, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, just grandfather's old books," and they were his textbooks. I was like, "Don't throw those out." So I have them on my shelf, and in mechanical engineering, I go back and the laws of physics hadn't changed in 80 years. So the same things that he learned, our students still need to learn. But there's a lot of things that were not in those books. So how do we do that? And then we add these other skills, these global competencies. How do we add communication, leadership, teamwork? Because I can't give up those other things. Then they talk about that students need to be entrepreneurs. They need to be involved with business skills and work through. Adding cultural awareness across. So the list keeps getting longer. And how do we get all this stuff in? There's an ever popular discussion occasionally to say, oh, are there things that we can give up? One of the things I tell my students is we teach in our first year courses, we teach software tools. And I guarantee them the one constant, the one thing I know for sure is the tools they use in their first year of college will probably be obsolete by the time they graduate because we'll have new versions. But there's some things that we can give up, but as we look at it, are there things that we're teaching just because we did them and every student should suffer like we suffered? Or are there things that we can relook at? But that doesn't mean we give up the fundamentals, those necessary things. So this causes us a little bit of a challenge. And I find it interesting because when I worked in the corporate world, we were always asked to do more faster and with less resources. I still remember when our chief executive officer, our CEO, who was a chemical engineer, I worked for GE, and we built engines for airplanes. And he said, you have to cut your development time for your engines in half. And we said, he's a chemical engineer. What does he know about airplane engines? And we looked at it and said, we've done this for decades the same way. We understand how to do it. And he said, you need to do it faster. And he was motivated by the global competition. There are other companies that are looking to do this, and if we don't do it, we'll be out of business. And I find it, well, I was going to say fascinating. Actually, it's frustrating in the universities. We look at our courses and say they're optimized. Don't mess with my course. I understand how to teach. How do I do all those other things and at the same time I can't? And I start to think about just adding classes. But that mindset that our graduates go into is a mindset that we can have is look at our classes and say, are there things that we can do are more efficient? Now, when I look at the future and I look at things, I always look at, I had a great uncle. My Uncle Archie, my great aunt had passed away, and he had I grew up in Michigan in the United States, and we didn't have an ocean, we had a lake, but the lake was so big. When I see the ocean here, it reminds me of the lake. It just tastes different. See, there's no salt. Okay, but we would sit on this porch, and when we would talk, at the end of every conversation, he seemed to get philosophical about the future. But it wasn't always the same kind of philosophy, that sometimes he would say something like, I envy you how young you are and the opportunities that you have. I feel bad that I'm going to miss it. And those were inspiring times. But then the other half of the time, he'd get there and basically say, the world's just a mess. I'm dying soon. I'm glad you're stuck with the problem. Sorry. And I think there are times when we look at things to say, here's all the pressures. We're not looking at the opportunities. Because when I look at that, it makes me think that we get frustrated to say we're being asked to do all these things, but there are also opportunities. And that's what I want you to think about are some of the opportunities. Some other things that we need to think about. So in our students, we talk about issues around sustainability. There used to be easier solutions. Send it out to the ocean, bury it, just put it out there. We're realizing that we've got so many people on Earth that we can't do that. So we have to get our students thinking about things like life cycles. This was an example of some of the challenges involving technology out. The U.S. National Academy came out with what are some of the big challenges? And they're not the traditional things. These are some of the hard problems that we haven't solved. These are some of the opportunities our students can tackle. I tell my students, I said, we've knocked off the easy problems, and we're saving the hard problems for them. But how do we equip them with these kinds of skills? Again, with the strong disciplinary skills, the strong technical skills. In fact, a lot of these problems require higher technical skills, but again, with these other professional skills. In the introduction, I'm a faculty member in a school of engineering education. Purdue was the first school. There were two, Purdue University and Virginia Tech, that actually created departments of engineering education. And this was in the sciences, in chemistry and physics. They've had actually a long history of having people in those disciplines also look at education. And when you look at the research, the research in learning didn't start when we came up with engineering education. There's been a long history in the learning sciences. But we in engineering have not been as connected with those people. What the research is talking about, and this comes back to how to be more efficient. You know, we tend to think in our class, and actually the way, if I'm looking at this, the way and I find this ironic, the way I'm delivering this is the way we typically deliver material. But what we find is if students are actively engaged, they can learn more efficiently. Getting students to reflect, there's this word called metacognition, is getting students to think about their thinking. Little learning loops to get things to move it past just short-term memory and into deeper learning so that they understand. Providing meaning or context. I don't know if you've had students ask to say, when would I ever use this? And to provide the kinds of experiences, this diagram at the bottom illustrates that we've got to have experiences for students to learn, to put things into their long-term memory. I don't know if you've ever taught a class and then taught the follow-on class. Often when I've gotten in and you say, oh, well, here's something, and they're like, oh, we don't remember that. Now, if another colleague taught the other class, we tend to blame the other colleague. But if you've ever had it where you've actually taught that, it puts you in an awkward position. There's one of my favorite little videos. It's a comedian, the Saturday Night Live program, probably 20 years ago, maybe longer, did a character, and he said he was going to create a 5-minute university and charge $20 US for a diploma. And he said, 5 years after somebody graduates, they hardly know anything, remember anything. So I'm just going to teach what you would remember after 5 years. And he said it would take about 5 minutes. That video clip was played at our Engineering Education Society, the annual meeting, at a plenary speaker of actually the author, the main author of this How People Learn book. It was a National Academy of Sciences book. When he got done, everybody was laughing at it. He said, you don't know how close the research actually shows for that. That the way students often learn in our classrooms is they learn for the tests and they don't carry things on. So the good news is that there are opportunities. But what we've got to not just think about, can I pour more in, or, hey, this is how we learned, is can we look at things a lot more, and I'm going to say looking at it like engineers, looking at it as designers. Can I take data, can I take information, and say, how do we create more effective learning opportunities? The other exciting opportunity is technology has come in and provided other tools that were not available when, I was going to say many of us, but many of you look a lot younger than I am. But when I went through, there were not the same tools. So we've got other tools at our disposal. And when we're looking at the leaders, I want to show you what we've done at Purdue Engineering. And what we did is we took the National Academy, that Engineer 2020, and tried to operationalize it, put in to say, how would this fit? And I use this just as an example, that this was the vision statement that we had at Purdue: be prepared for leadership roles in the global technical, economic, and societal challenges. So one of the changes here is the understanding that the type of challenges are not just traditional technical things, but they impact broader society. The strategy that they did is provide educational experiences that develop students' knowledge, abilities, quality, and needs to construct solutions, again, economically, socially, and culturally relevant. So broader sets of skills. The way that we did this is to look at 3 different groups of things that we had to provide students. The first thing was a group of what we said abilities. So these are things that we want students to be able to do. And you're going to see many things there that wouldn't be on traditional engineering lists. The second thing that they did is they looked at knowledge areas and understanding. This is where a lot of the disciplinary, the traditional things come in, but also with things like multidisciplinary. And when we say multidisciplinary, it doesn't just mean I'm going to have a mechanical engineer talk to a petroleum engineer. It means engaging like the colleagues from English or humanities or business across. Pardon me?
And math.
And math, yes. And then being able to integrate, often making sure that students, when they leave us, can integrate this knowledge and actually apply it to, I'm going to say, authentic problems. And then the third pillar were qualities that we wanted to have the students have. To be innovative, strong work ethic, ethically responsible in global, societal, intellectual context, adaptable to changing environments, curious and persistent. So the strategy here was that to achieve the vision, these were the areas and the pillars, and that's the model that we've taken in engineering to look at the future. Now, I want to give you an example of a program that we have, and then talk about the impact that it's had based on some of the research that I think is interesting. So EPICS, and we've gone away, it's an acronym, but we've stopped actually using the acronym, partially because when I go over to students in math or to English and I say, oh, it's an engineering program, they say, oh, it's not for me. And we actually had 70 different disciplines in our course last year. Because what we do is, and we have students from first year to fourth year, we mix them, the different majors, because what we do is we address problems out in the community, locally and globally, that we look at challenges and can we develop designs that involve technology, but we need disciplines from across the university. At Purdue, our courses are sized by credit hours. A typical class for us would be 3 or 4 credit hours. And our design course is intentionally half that, with the intention that the students need to take it for 2 semesters to make up for 1 semester course. So the students take it for a longer period of time, and I'll show you later why that's critical. We want students to take our course for multiple semesters. Now, our instructors are called advisors. So we actually don't call them instructors, we call them advisors. You could use the word coach, because what we try to do is empower the students to actually do the designs, and we're there to guide them. So it puts us in a different role. I want to show you some example projects, and we work kind of in 4 areas. One of the things is we call human services. We will work with organizations that design, work with people of need. Access and abilities, working with people with disabilities. We've done software issues, prosthetics, also done things with children with disabilities. We work with education, especially we'll work in schools, museums to look at innovative learning environments for pre-university, younger students. And also we'll work with projects from alternative energy to sustainability projects, water projects, those types of things. What we did is we went out, we've had about 2,000 students graduate from Purdue having taken this course. And we went out and surveyed to say, okay, from your experience now that you're out in industry, and our program started in 1995. So we've got some graduates that have been out for 17, 18 years, some of them more recent. And there were 3 questions that we were really looking at, presented here. What we wanted to see is, how did this course help prepare them, or did it prepare them? And how did it compare with your other experiences on campus in more traditional classes? We had 523 complete surveys. We had about 600 students, or 600 graduates, start to take the survey. We only went through where we had complete sets of data. Now, one of the things in educational research is you can do quantitative analyses, and you can also do what they call qualitative, is we can go out and we can interview students. And we used the survey data to identify 27, and in qualitative work, 27 is actually a large number. And we did 1-hour interviews, transcribed those, and looked for themes across those interviews. And looking at the survey data from a quantitative standpoint, we looked at the survey questions, and there were 3 factors that popped out. One of them revolved around the professional competencies, professional skills that students develop. Their perspectives about engineering, and also in the areas of community engagement, or their interaction with the community, both as a professional and a citizen. Thought some of the interesting things that came out were themes for what our program did, and I think it provides some insights for the type of experiences that we can provide at the university. One of the themes was this theme of epics. Our course is a bridge, and what they meant by that is a bridge between the university and then their workplace. And some of the interesting things that came out was they talked about how in some ways it was real, but it was also what they called safe. And what they meant by safe is they could make mistakes, but we wouldn't fire them. That the risks were lower. They had provided a structure around it. So in some ways they were able to practice, but we were also there to help guide or to coach them. And what they talked about is this loop back. It allowed them to gain experience, but again with a safety net. And also when they made mistakes, we were there to actually help guide and inform what they were doing in that feedback. So some examples, for each of these themes, I'll provide a quote to illustrate. But this person, when she talked, said, I think I would have been fired if I'd done something like an internship for what happened on my team. But the bottom part, I think EPICS gave me a chance to understand what the working world was going to be like, but I still had that safety net. Another theme that came out was the EPICS was experience. Now, it's also interesting that, remember, we're doing community-based projects. So I have students that are designing some therapeutic device or toy for a child with a disability, and then they go off and they could work for like an oil company. And one of the things that came out with the themes is the students didn't think what we were doing in our course really applied to what they would do later until they got in their job. And then they saw how that was real experience. And they also talked in the interviews about, yeah, we didn't believe you. When you said it was going to be, they were actually surprised. But what it allowed them to do is when they got out there, they said, oh, okay, now I'm doing these things, I remember this. And they were able to actually make the connection. So I remember in EPICS when I was working with our external customers. In this case, it was an elementary school, and I met with the principal and some of the teachers. It was similar, having explained to what we're doing, and it was valuable. So when they're out and having to work with real customers, they say, wow, this is just like working with that school and the principal and the teachers. Also in developing their professional skills. So this is something when we're talking that we may come from different disciplines. And the students honestly are frustrated at times to say, well, why do we have to work across these disciplines? Get out in the workforce and realize, wow, at the university, you know, in companies, the corporate world, they don't segregate people by discipline. Here's the function, here's the task that you have, and you work across. Working with people who are technical and non-technical. We didn't have, you know, direct experience really with how all that worked, that they had to figure it out themselves, that we put students in there and gave them some tools. But how do we get them to work? Some of the characteristics that came out of this, both for our program, but I think that they have applications across, is that they provided real projects, real customers, but again, that they were safe. So we put students in situations where they're actually applying their professional skill, their disciplinary skills, but providing that safety net. They were open-ended projects, so there was not an answer. There was not the answer at the back of the book or in the chapter. One of the fun things that I have in doing these projects is when we get these teams, the students say, how do we do this? I'll tell them, I have no idea. Because we're working on real projects, and multidisciplinary, but with a common goal. So students have to have a goal of what they need to have done and working across. The role of the faculty or the graduate student assistants in an advisory role, and not as a teaching. And what we found is it changed their perceptions about engineering. So I want to touch on some other things and then loop back a little bit. But if we see the professions and we see some of the things like in engineering, in other disciplines, design is something when students people are creating things. And if you look at some of the characteristics of expert designers, there's some things that come out. The ability to make trade-offs and decisions. Now this comes back to some of what we would put our students through with the real projects is now I have to make choices. A lot of students believe that life is full of, you know, correct answers, that there's an answer in the back of a magic book somewhere. And not, you know, when there are multiple correct solutions. Or sometimes there's not an obvious correct solutions, I have to make trade-offs. Reflective thinking, and I put this here in bold because remember, if I went back and said the learning science folks talk about the need to reflect or to think about what we're reflecting, and lo and behold, in the engineering discipline, there's actually some things that talk about that too. In our EPICS program, we teach design, and we teach something that's called human-centered design. And this was actually our design process, and the key thing here is we put people in the middle of that design process. And human-centered design is one of those modern, globally competitive terms, is to get people to think about how people are going to use things, how people are going to interact with the things, and to put a focus on users. Now, this has implications because to do that, we need to put students in situations where they can interact with users or people. The benefits to human-centered design, people that have studied global companies have looked at those that are applying human-centered design principles are the ones that are succeeding, especially in consumer products. There's a company, a design firm, internationally known design firm, started at Stanford University, is IDEO. And this was their model for design. When you look at things, they start up here at the top with what do people desire. They start actually with thinking of the person. And then they look at what's technically feasible and bring that in, what's economically viable, and when those three things intersect. But I mention this because it starts with people, and to get our students thinking about the people first. We've looked at human-centered design and actually students' understanding of design and how they progress. And actually my associate director that some of your colleagues got to meet when they visited Purdue actually did her PhD research on exploring how students develop. And what she found is that students could be classified in different categories of beginners to more advanced learners. And one of the things I found really interesting is the horizontal axis is understanding of design. So from an engineer, the ability to understand design and have a more advanced understanding of design moves from the left to the right. The understanding of users and how people interact is the vertical axis, moving from top to bottom. And if you notice, the progression is diagonal. So as the designers understand that I need people and understand users and get feedback from people, they actually move further to the right in their design skill, in their technical skills. What she found is the thing that moves students are experiences. That as students move up, they can move back to what we call critical experiences that they had, that they can say, oh, this is where I learned this thing and I moved up. The very top students almost always had some type of immersive experience, some experience where they were a very intense experience.
These were only engineering students?
These were, that's a good question. These were not just engineering students. The majority were engineering students. They'd been on some type of engineering team. So there were students from what we would call the liberal arts or education, a few of those students. The ones up at the top were all engineering students.
You allow questions?
What?
You allow questions?
Sure.
The names of the students in this experiment, was it
The first year to fourth year.
So it's the whole undergraduate?
Yeah, it was the whole undergraduate, because actually trying to get a space. We've done some work with students who were graduate students, some graduate students with some experience. And we've yet to find a category beyond what we had. And it was actually not, what we found is that in the progression, it didn't track as much based on the year but it actually had to do with the types of experiences they had. Yes?
Well, the number of course projects the student had, how would that impact his experience?
The number of projects they had?
Course projects, even if that's more, but a student who went through 3 course projects versus one who went through only 1. How would this?
So the number of projects was related to their experience, but it actually had to do with the type of experience. So some of the students actually that were on the very bottom were 4th-year students and had been through many projects. But there were things that they actually hadn't learned. So again, that type of experience, as I went through the project, so simply going through the project, that's a very good question, actually didn't necessarily move them. It was the type of project with the kind of learning that was drawn out and the type of experience. Often the experience was a mistake, or to come down and say, oh, I hadn't thought about this, and that mistake or potential mistake was made real to the student. And when it was made real and it was something, an experience they had, that they learned from that, and then they moved on from that. Yes?
The type of experience is advanced or is primary level. This is what you are talking about, or the discipline? Type of experience.
What, the type of experience that they would have? The type of experience, for example, is understanding that that there were people that were going to use their design that had knowledge that they didn't have. So an experience that showed them, for example, that if I'm making a design for you, I have to gain your perspective to be able to see how you're going to use it, versus just I'm going to use my own knowledge. That my own knowledge is not enough, that I need to get knowledge from other people, and can I take your perspective in the need to do that to get the best product at the end. That's the type of experience. Did that answer your question?
Yes, because I thought that is an advanced stage or medium stage or basic stage. I thought that, right?
Yeah. So it's actually understanding that it's how do I use tools, how do I do things to engage somebody, and the need to get feedback as I moved along. I'll give you some examples. The group at the top, one of the groups was designing a water system for a village, a poor community in a developing country. And the students, when they had spent time there, understood that if they did things wrong, people could die. And it had impact. And they came down and realized that there were cultural issues that they had to consider for their design to be used, things that they hadn't thought of. Another group was somebody actually working for the military and was doing some software, and he spent time with the troops that were going to be used. And he realized that if his software, if they needed to actually take their hand off their weapon and adjust the software, that was a life-threatening thing. That if they had to do that somebody could die. So it was the importance of really understanding and things they hadn't thought about, and had those experiences up at the top. The other piece on this, I guess a third example, is we had students just this last summer not do something that was necessarily life-threatening, like those other examples, but they spent a week at a camp for children with disabilities, and they spent the entire week with them. And they came away understanding that the designs that they were doing, electrical, mechanical type designs, that they had ideas before they went to the camp, many of which they realized wouldn't work, or that there was a different perception, or they weren't understanding what they needed. So that immersive experience of gaining an appreciation for the users is what moved them up. In addition to, when we're talking about design and those things, there are other types of competencies. The ability to work across cultures, global competencies, is something that has been talked about a lot. And again, what the research finds is they need for students to gain this, there's some type of experience, a significant or immersive type experience. There are other skills too, and I threw this slide up because often what we say is, so students need an experience. We'll put them in teams. They've had a team experience. I'll check this off. But what students need is there's a balance between providing them skills, teaching them some tools, and then providing the experience and help them mentor, think through. That graph up there is something that actually a colleague that you've met, Professor Matt Olin, brought into our first year course, and we show is the research shows any team goes through a phase of conflict, and giving students tools on how to address that conflict, especially if you're looking at cross-cultural, cross-continent teams, some things can get more intense. Yes?
Do you provide from the workforce speakers for 1 hour or even half an hour to inject some ideas into it?
Oh, do we bring people out from industry?
Yes, somebody who has been for 5 or 10 years on the job.
So that's a good question. It's finding people that students will listen to. So some of these voices, some of the perspectives that will bring people, these tools are actually informed by industry. Sometimes we'll bring them in, or sometimes we'll bring little video clips or quotes and things like that.
So you do that?
Yes. When you look at getting students to understand cultural issues, one of the things that we found is to gain some of those skills, you don't necessarily have to have them travel very far away. Can we introduce them to some kind of culture? And it's one of the reasons that I've become so passionate about the community-based projects, is getting people to work with, like, people with disabilities can start to raise issues of understanding culture, working with other communities locally. Here's just a little thought. When you're looking at these experiences again, and we look at our curriculum, we tend to have, here's our disciplinary courses, here's how we all went through, how can I redesign things within the little boxes? But what we found is if you provide some kind of experience, now I teach a design course, so of course I have a design experience. But can we provide experiences that students could have in addition to their classes, and there can be an interplay. So as students start to learn things, they can move into that experience. It also provides ways, if we mix students, our older students can start to actually have experiences in mentoring, leading. They can leave our institution having actually led teams. Now the other piece on this is, when we think about it, is there's opportunities to learn. So this question about, could I bring somebody in from industry and arrange them to give a little lecture, or what I can do is I can have a video clip available for students, and I can provide some tools. So if I go back to that teaming example, if I've got a student and you all are a team and you're working and you've got some challenges, I can say, okay, here's some things I want you to look at, and then we're going to come back and talk about your problem. So I can do just in time. You're on a team and you don't need that piece, but you do, so I can personalize some of these things. So technology, some of the tools we have is look at, are there technological tools that we can add so I can personalize students' experience more? And can I provide them a kind of experience where they're integrating and they're using these things? So what we're doing is optimizing our times as instructors to be this middle piece helping to translate back across. And I think that there's some exciting opportunities, but it forces us to look at some things differently. One of them is when we think about the idea of these experiences, we tend to think in terms of my course begins, students know nothing. At the end of my course, they will be fully enlightened if things went well. And if I've got some type of experience, it's got to last exactly my course length. Well, the real world doesn't always work that way. So these experiences may bleed in. So that causes me to think about how would I manage those. And I may have to overlap students, bring students in, bring students out. And this allows that kind of significant or critical experience. And we've actually done that in our EPICS program. The projects the students work on are actually in the semester. When I look at opportunities too, and this is a advertisement for the community projects, also just thinking about, if you think about sustainability, there's a limited set of resources. Can we use our universities to actually add capacity into society? And that actually provides some of these kinds of experiences that can prepare students, just like our students talked about how they're better prepared in industry, having done community-based projects. We talk also about the idea for something that's called the triple bottom line. When you look at the impact on people, profit, planet, and you look at solutions that are consistent with sustainability, is getting students to understand those pieces. Being entrepreneurial, it is getting students in these experiences. So again, in our design course, we'll have students develop something and then ask the question to say, all right, we've developed a solution for one person or one community. Are there other opportunities? So there are opportunities through these experiences to start to add skills such as entrepreneurship within the same type of course. So this idea of being sustainable, developing these competencies, we teach all those things in a course with the same course, again, with that experience. There are opportunities, too, to look at as we're looking at these global leaders, is looking at partners. How can the university partner with companies? We talked about it as educators and also the communities and societies as a whole. There's a need as we look at the needs for our students to add all these pieces, is if we just look at rearranging the boxes, is going to be a challenge. If we think of opportunities and we leverage both experiences and technology, we can create the kind of educational experiences that are really going to make our students leaders. I go back to what my great Uncle Archie would have said, and I think, honestly, if he's here, and looking objectively, he says, you know what, the future's really exciting. There are challenges. And globalization, it's something that I appreciated working with my industry experience, is they always preach globalization as an opportunity. It's a competition, but that competition is going to make us better. And I know we have many disciplines, but I tend to think of, we need to engineer, if I can use that word in a broader sense, education is really looking at the educational experiences, looking at the resources we have both at the university, and can we create experiences that are more efficient for our students. There's research data out there that creating experiences can actually improve learning and help our students be equipped with some of the broader skills that they need. I don't know if there are any other questions. That's actually my last slide. I think we have a couple more minutes. Okay, thank you. Open up for questions. Yes, sir.
At the end, you wanted to suggest that we create such type of educational system that will be connected with the social capital and sustainable development, which will be benefited by the community.
What we found, yes. What I found, or what we found, is actually integrating some of these projects, these kinds of experiences, can add a dimension to their education. The types of experiences are not limited to the socially relevant community projects. But what we found I would encourage you to consider those types of projects because they can be easy projects. to maintain. There are things that can add value back to the community and to get students to think about some of these larger issues. It's when we go to those of us in engineering would go to like a colleague in English and to say, are there tools to help the students understand the larger context? And they get excited to say, wow, okay. And we develop some of those tools, and we can translate, and this is how that's going to equip you for later. But a piece on those experiences is getting somebody who's actually going to use the results of our project. That's actually the key. When I was in industry, we would sponsor university projects, but honestly, as a corporation, we would not give the university our most important things because we had our top professionals working on those. In the university also, your students take multiple classes. And so the project, if I was going to give it from industry, is not anybody's mathematician, right? Computer engineering. Okay, and so I may have something in like computer engineering that's not my area, but I say, okay, here's my colleague with the other section. You need to go see him, and he's going to mentor those. So it's a team approach. And actually, that more simulates what you would do out in industry. Because the model in a classroom is, I, as a professor, know everything that you need to know. But when they go and they have a manager, a boss, they're not going to go to that person for all their questions. In fact, I've had bosses where you don't go to them for any of your questions, but you need to find resources. Yes?
That's why I had, this is called the Googleian generation, and that's why Uncle Google is a very important.
Yes. Well, actually, yeah, with the Google things, so students, this is one of the differences. So when we would have a challenge, we'd go to the library and look up things. Now the students are like, oh, yeah, Google. And whatever pops up first must be right, right? And this, well, I've learned in the design classes to have my computer up, and when they show, oh, we did an extensive research, and this was the best product, I Google that product, and when the first thing comes up matches their slide, they're in trouble without reason. But it's finding those things and to say, okay, I can get that information, but is that information the right? So this is the kind of example, is to say, all right, you took that, and now we're going to apply it, and I'm going to give it to somebody who's really going to use it. And I realize, oh, okay, I needed more information on that. But the tools that they have are just amazing and incredible. But how do I apply those, and do I have a kind of experience that can help sort that? Yes, yes.
Thanks for that. I enjoyed the presentation, especially the factor that community-based experience and learning. Of course, you take into consideration the company where they will be working, equipping the students with the tools and skills. With regard to globalization, isn't there, maybe that's a philosophical question, some kind of trade-off or contradiction between the community-based and, let's say, industry-based, where maybe their priorities are different?
So it's one of the things that we found in the research data for our alums, is they saw this as different when they were taking a class. When they went out and they went into industry, they realized that those experiences that they had actually translated. You mentioned, I brought up that I used to design aircraft engines. So I do a lot of translating with, here's this issue that we got up working with a community-based project. But the community projects, they have a social benefit. But really, it's applying our disciplinary skills to address a need, develop a product for a real user. Those things are directly applicable to industry. A challenge we have in our classes is we don't know what industry our students are going to go into. So we can't train them for a specific industry. But providing them experiences that are going to equip them So a lot of it's like fundamentals that in engineering, nobody would say, well, our students don't need calculus anymore, because we understand that's a foundational skill. But the ability to work with somebody, the ability to communicate an idea, the ability to work with other people to come together to get a solution, those are also fundamental skills. So that's one of the things that we translate, and this actually turned my thinking 180 degrees, because I left industry thinking I would bring industry projects into the university. I thought everybody should learn about jet engines, because that's like the coolest thing, best thing. I never thought about designing a home for the poor or designing a device for a child with a disability would make somebody a better jet engine designer. But that's actually, because that kind of experience is going to provide the skills to do that. Now, we need to translate that. And that's one of the things that we do, is you're taking other courses and you have this experience, and the combination of those courses and that experience will actually prepare you out for industry.
No, I understand it. I agree with you. Now, sometimes the globalization of big companies, and they have certain priorities. Of course, they develop products for the human being or for any community, but sometimes their main priority is not really community, where is selling the product.
Oh, yeah.
And this sometimes goes against. This is what I mean.
Okay. So,
which is a different experience.
Right. I understand. Sorry. Something that I learned at GE is if you ever met the chairman and was asked the question, what do we make? The correct answer was money. Okay? He said, what do we make? We make money. But here's what we want to do is we want to make that money in a sustainable manner. We want to create companies that are going to last. So if you're going to make something, one, that nobody uses, you're not going to be globally competitive. If we're approaching our business practices in a way where we're creating environmental disasters, that's a liability that may catch up to us. I also would like our graduates to come out to be thinking about what are some of the other ramifications of the decisions that we make. So if I go back to that triple bottom line issue, is we want to make profit, but we also need to think about people and the environment. And so our goal is we create those global leaders, that they're people that actually optimize. So it's not that we're not going to make money. That I want people out there to say, yes, we're going to make money, and you need to generate wealth. And actually, I mean, there's a societal benefit of generating wealth, because the underserved, the phrase, you know, is generating more resources can meet more needs. So actually, there are times where they seem in contradiction, but they shouldn't be. And our goal should be is creating those future leaders that will find that balance.
Yes, sir. The last question, if you would like to know more about teaching engineering with community engagement, then you attend the
workshop. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for this interesting presentation. I just do have a question, because I'm going through a dilemma here. Most of the techniques that were presented here within the engineering education, they require a team or kind of a movement from each department. They cannot rely only on an individual. So for someone who's interested and who would like to start, shall I wait and get people on board these ideas to be implemented, or shall I start alone, or how does it work?
Excellent question. One of the things you can do is actually start in your own class. So when I laid this big vision out, I really believe, and as I travel in different countries and talk, that this idea of coming together as a team in the universities, and honestly, the universities is one of the things we're creating teams. Getting student teams together is much easier than getting faculty teams, at least in my institution. I haven't been here long enough, but the expression on some of you, you've got challenges here. What you want to do is you want to work with a small group and start with some of these ideas on a small scale and then start to build. So there are things you can do actually in your classes, making them more active, adding some projects in there where students actually have to apply some of the things that they've learned. Getting students to apply the theory, the theoretical concepts that you're teaching in a class to something practical starts to provide all kinds of experiences as students say, well, how do you do it this way? Where's that sample problem in the book? Well, what we're doing here doesn't have a sample problem, so they've got to synthesize things. So you can start with small type examples. I tried to lay out like the big model to get people thinking. But yes, you could start just with some projects, some experiences in your own course, whether it's a small class or even big class.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for